Karen stood at the locked gate, staring at the chain and padlock, her voice sharp and furious. "This road has been used by our community for over a decade. You have no right to lock it. I'm giving you 7 days to remove that gate, or the HOA will take legal action." Like threatening lawsuits could erase what the deed had been saying since. 1,982, like 15 years of informal use, could override 78 acres of continuous family ownership. What she didn't know was that I had trail cameras recording every trespass, including hers. This wasn't a shortcut or community access. 78 acres. Got private gravel road. An HOA president who'd planned a $20 million expansion on land she didn't own, never asked permission to use, and assumed she could force access through harassment and litigation. Karen made the mistake every HOA president makes, assuming that being in charge of her community gave her authority over land outside it, and that threats, public pressure, and lawsuits would force me to surrender my rights. They didn't. Over 8 months, I watched Karen Westfield discover what happens when you plan a 50-home expansion without securing access. Personally cut someone's lock while suing them for protecting their property, and stand to gain $85,000 from a project you never disclosed your financial interest in. This is the story of how an HOA president lost her position, her reputation, $12,000 in court, and her home because she couldn't answer one question the judge asked. "Did you ask for permission?" Not because I wanted to destroy her, because property law doesn't care how long residents used a road informally. It cares who owns the land. So what happens when you assume access to property that was never yours? But let me start from the beginning. Before we dive into, I'd love to know where you're listening from today. And don't forget to hit the like and subscribe buttons for more interesting stories just like this. I inherited the land in late March, 78 acres of mixed hardwood forest, overgrown fields, and a network of old logging roads that hadn't been maintained in years. My Uncle Ray had owned it since the early 1980s. Back when this part of the county was still rural and undeveloped, he'd used it for hunting, kept a small equipment shed near the eastern boundary, and mostly left it alone. When he passed, the property came to me. No mortgage, no liens, just 78 acres of quiet. Private land about 40 minutes outside the city. I'd planned to use it the same way Ray had. Weekends, hunting season, maybe build a small cabin someday. It was a retreat, a place to disconnect. But within a week of closing on the estate transfer, I learned that my land wasn't as isolated as I'd thought. Meadowbrook Estates sat directly to the west of my property, a sprawling HOA community of nearly 300 homes, all built within the last 15 years. The development was upscale, brick and stone facades, manicured lawns, streetlights that looked like old gas lamps, and a massive entrance with a stone sign reading Meadowbrook Estates, a master-planned community. The HOA was strict. Every home had to meet design guidelines. Lawns had to be mowed weekly. Mailboxes had to match. Fences required board approval. It was the kind of place where people measured grass height and reported neighbors for leaving. Trash cans out past noon on collection day. My 78 acres bordered Meadowbrook's eastern side, separated by a line of old survey stakes and a few stretches of sagging wire fence that Ray had put up decades ago. What I didn't realize at first was that my land had been part of the original development plan. I found the history in the county records. In 2009, a developer named Crestwood Properties had approached Ray about selling his land so they could expand Meadowbrook Estates into a larger, more profitable subdivision. Ray had refused, repeatedly. He didn't want to sell, didn't want the noise, didn't want suburbia creeping onto his property, so Crestwood developed around him. They built Meadowbrook on the land they could acquire. They left Ray's 78 acres untouched, an island of undeveloped forest sitting right next to their pristine HOA community. The plat map told the story clearly. Meadowbrook's boundary followed the edge of my property almost exactly, then curved westward where the developer had run out of land they controlled. My 78 acres weren't part of Meadowbrook. They'd never been part of Meadowbrook. And Ray had made damn sure they stayed that way. One feature of my property that would become very important was the old gravel access road that ran along the eastern edge of my land. Just inside my boundary line, the road was narrow, rutted, and overgrown in places, but it was functional. It started at the county road to the north, cut south through my property for about half a mile, and looped back toward the western section where Ray's shed sat. For years, Ray had led a few Meadowbrook. Residents used the road informally as a shortcut to reach the county road. It saved them a couple of minutes, compared to driving through Meadowbrook's winding internal streets and out the main gate. Ray didn't mind. He wasn't out there most of the time anyway, and the occasional car didn't bother him. But that informal permission was just that. Informal, casual, revocable. There was no recorded easement, no written agreement, no legal right. I didn't know any of this yet when I drove out to walk the property for the first time. I just knew I owned 78 acres. I wanted to see what I had. I was standing near the gravel road, looking at the survey stakes and checking the boundary when a silver Lexus SUV pulled up behind my truck. A woman got out, late 50s. Blonde hair styled in a sharp bob, wearing a blazer, slacks, and heels that seemed impractical for gravel. She carried a leather portfolio and walked toward me with the confidence of someone used to being in charge. "You must be the new owner," she said, extending a hand. "I'm Karen Westfield, president of the Meadowbrook Estates HOA. Welcome to the neighborhood." I shook her hand. "Thanks, Alex Bennett. I wanted to introduce myself and make sure you're aware of our community standards here," Karen said, pulling a glossy brochure from her portfolio. "Meadowbrook is a master-planned community. We take property values very seriously, and we expect adjacent landowners to maintain their properties in a way that reflects well on the area." I glanced at the brochure. It was full of photos of perfect lawns, clean driveways, and smiling families standing in front of houses that looked like they belonged in a magazine. "This is nice," I said, "but I'm not part of your HOA." Karen laughed a short, dismissive sound. "Well, you're next to us, so you need to respect our rules. It's just common courtesy. We can't have your property looking like a junkyard when our residents are paying premium prices to live here." "I'm not planning to turn it into a junkyard," I said. "But I'm also not planning to follow HOA guidelines for property I own outright." Karen's smile tightened. "We also need to talk about the access road. Several of our residents use it to reach the county road. We'll need to keep it maintained, graded, gravel replenished, free of debris. It's part of being a good neighbor." "The road's on my property," I said. "I didn't agree to maintain it for anyone. Your uncle allowed access," Karen said, her tone sharpening. "It's been that way for years. You can't just change that. I can if it's my land." Karen stared at me for a moment, her expression hardening. Then she forced another smile. "I'm sure we can work this out. Why don't you stop by the HOA office this week and go over expectations and make sure we're all on the same page?" "I'll pass," I said, "but thanks for stopping by." Karen's smile vanished. She turned without another word, got back in her Lexus, and drove off. I spent the rest of the afternoon walking the property, checking the survey stakes and taking photos. When I got home, I pulled out the deed, the survey, and the title report. Everything was clear. The 78 acres were 100% outside Meadowbrook Estates HOA boundaries. There were no recorded easements, covenants, or agreements granting access to anyone. The gravel road was entirely within my property lines. Ray had never signed anything giving Meadowbrook legal access. Karen's expectations had no legal basis. Her residents had been using the road because Ray allowed it casually, informally, revocably. But that permission didn't transfer to me, and it didn't create a legal right. I made a decision that night. I was going to protect my property. The following weekend, I drove out with a truckload of supplies. I posted large, weatherproof private property, nitrogen monoxide trespassing signs every 100 feet along the boundary with Meadowbrook. I also posted signs at both ends of the gravel road, where it intersected with the county road and where it curved toward Ray's old shed. Then I installed a heavy-duty steel gate across the road, about 50 feet from the county road entrance, with a chain and padlock. The gate was simple, functional, and legal. The road was mine. I had every right to control access. I locked the gate, took photos for my records, and left. 3 days later, I got a call from an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. The message was from Karen Westfield, and her tone had shifted from friendly to furious. "Mr. Bennett, this is Karen Westfield from Meadowbrook Estates. I don't know what you think you're doing, but you've installed a gate that blocks community access to the county road. That road has been used by our residents for over a decade, and you have no right to lock it. I'm giving you 7 days to remove that gate, or the HOA will take legal action. This is unacceptable." I deleted the message. 2 days after that, Karen showed up at my property in person and announced uninvited. And carrying a printed document, I was near the shed, clearing brush, when I heard her car pull up. She got out and marched toward me, holding the document like a weapon. "Mr. Bennett," she said, her voice sharp. "Oh. This is a formal violation notice from the Meadowbrook Estates HOA." I stopped what I was doing and looked at her. "A violation notice for what?" "You installed a gate that blocks community access," Karen said. "That road has been used by Meadowbrook residents for years. You don't have the right to lock it." "It's my road," I said. "On my land, I absolutely have the right to lock it." "Your uncle never locked it," Karen snapped. "He understood the importance of being a good neighbor. My uncle allowed occasional use as a courtesy. That doesn't create a legal right." Karen thrust the document at me. "This notice requires you to remove the gate within 7 days, or the HOA will pursue legal action for blocking established access." I took the document, glanced at it, and handed it back. "This is meaningless. Your HOA has no authority over my property. I'm not a member. I never signed your covenants. And there's no recorded easement giving you access to this road." Karen's face flushed red. "We've been using that road for over 10 years. That creates a prescriptive easement." "Not in North Carolina," I said. "Prescriptive easement requires 20 years of continuous hostile use. You've had 15, and it was permissive. My uncle allowed it. That doesn't count." Karen's jaw tightened. "You're making a serious mistake. This community has resources. We have attorneys. And we will not tolerate someone blocking access that our residents depend on." "Then your residents should have gotten it in writing," I said. "The gate stays locked." Karen stared at me, her hands clenched into fists, her voice shaking with barely controlled rage. "You're going to regret this," she said. Then she turned, got back in her car, and drove off. I stood there for a long time after she left, looking at the locked gate in the distance. Karen Westfield wasn't just upset. She was threatened. And I had a feeling this was about more than just a shortcut. Because people don't fight this hard over convenience. They fight over control. And Karen had just realized that. Got 78 acres of land right next to her HOA. Kingdom were completely outside her reach, and there wasn't a damn thing she could do about it. I found out about Karen's expansion plan from my neighbor to the north, a man named Ed Paulson, who owned 15 acres of farmland that had been in his family since the 1950s. Ed wasn't part of Meadowbrook Estates. He'd refused to sell when the developer came calling. Just like my Uncle Ray had, Ed stopped by one Saturday afternoon while I was working on the gate. He pulled up in an old Ford pickup, got out, and walked over with a thermos of coffee and a knowing grin. "You've pissed off Karen Westfield," Ed said, handing me a cup. "Welcome to the club. She seems to think I'm obligated to follow her HOA rules," I said. Ed laughed. "That's Karen. She thinks the whole county should follow her HOA rules. But you locking that gate? That's not about courtesy. That's about her expansion plan." "What expansion plan?" Ed leaned against his truck and told me the story. For the past 2 years, Karen had been working on what she called Meadowbrook Estates Phase. It's a massive expansion that would add 50 new luxury homes to the community, along with upgraded amenities, a new pool, tennis courts, expanded walking trails, and a community clubhouse. The expansion site was a 100-acre parcel directly east of Meadowbrooks, current boundary agricultural land that had recently been sold to Crestwood Properties, the same developer who'd built Meadowbrook. Back in 2009, Karen had been heavily involved in brokering the deal. She'd worked with Crestwood, pitched the expansion to Meadowbrook residents, and secured preliminary HOA board approval for the project. Phase 2 was her signature initiative, the crowning achievement of her tenure as HOA president. There was just one problem. Access. The Phase 2 expansion site was landlocked on 3 sides. Meadowbrook to the west, protected wetlands to the south, and Ed's farm to the north. The only practical road access to the site ran through my 78 acres, specifically via the old gravel road that connected to the county road. That road you just locked? Ed said. That's the only way Crestwood can get construction, equipment, utilities, and buyers into Phase 2 without spending a fortune. What's the alternative? I asked. Build a new road through the wetlands, Ed said. That's a permitting nightmare. County won't approve it without environmental impact studies, mitigation plans, and a dozen other hoops. Crestwood looked into it. Estimated cost, $2 million minimum, and it could take years. I stared at him. So Karen's entire expansion depends on access through my land. Exactly, Ed said. And she assumed she'd have it. Why would she assume that? Because your uncle let a few people use the road as a shortcut. Karen figured that meant the road was basically public. She also assumed that when Ray died, whoever inherited the land would either sell cheap or cooperate. She didn't count on you locking the gate. It took a sip of coffee, processing. So this isn't about neighbors using a shortcut. It's about a multi-million-dollar development that can't happen without my road. Bingo, Ed said. And Karen's already told residents that Phase 2 is a done deal. She's sold them on higher property values, better amenities, and a bigger, more prestigious community. If it falls apart now, she's finished. That's not my problem, I said. Ed grinned. I know. But it's going to be hers. 3 days later, I received a certified letter from Whitmore & Associates, a law firm representing the Meadowbrook Estates, HOA. The letter was 6 pages long and aggressive in tone. Unauthorized obstruction of access, demand for immediate removal. Dear Mr. Bennett, this firm represents the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association. It's come to our attention that you have installed a locked gate across a roadway that has been used by Meadowbrook residents for over a decade. Your obstruction of this roadway is unlawful and interferes with established access rights. We write to demand the immediate removal of the gate and restoration of access. The letter went on to make 3 legal claims. Prescriptive easement. The road had been used openly, continuously, and adversely for over 10 years, creating a prescriptive easement. Under North Carolina law, implied easement by necessity. Meadowbrook Estates and the adjacent Phase 2 expansion site required access to the county road, and my road was the only practical route. Public interest. Blocking access to the road harmed the county's tax base by preventing a major residential development, and I could be compelled to grant access in the public interest. The letter concluded with a threat. If you do not remove the gate and restore access within 10 days, we will file suit seeking an injunction, damages, and attorney's fees. We will also pursue all available remedies under North Carolina property law. I read the letter twice, then called Patricia Gaines. Patricia had represented me in the Bennett Lake cases and the electric fence dispute. She knew property law inside and out, and she didn't tolerate legal bluffs. I scanned the letter and emailed it to her. She called me back within an hour. You're bluffing, Patricia said. None of these claims hold water. Walk me through it, I said. First, prescriptive easement. They're claiming the road's been used for 10 years. But North Carolina requires 20 years of continuous hostile use to establish a prescriptive easement. They're 10 years short. And more importantly, the use wasn't hostile, was permissive. Your uncle allowed it as a courtesy. Permissive use doesn't count toward a prescriptive easement, no matter how long it goes on. What about implied easement by necessity? Doesn't apply. Implied easement by necessity only arises when a single parcel of land is subdivided, and one piece becomes landlocked as a result of the subdivision. Your land was never part of Meadowbrook or the expansion site. They're separate parcels with separate ownership histories. There's no common origin, so there's no implied easement. In public interest? Completely irrelevant. Private property. Rights don't disappear just because someone wants to build something that might generate tax revenue. If that were the law, the government could seize anyone's land anytime a developer had a project. It doesn't work that way, so they have no case. None, Patricia said. This is a pressure tactic. They're hoping you'll get scared. Remove the gate and let them use the road while they build their expansion. Then they'll claim continuous use and try to establish the easement retroactively. Don't fall for it. What do we do? We respond. I'll send a demand letter making it crystal clear. The HOA has no rights to your land or your road. Any continued use is trespassing. If they file suit, we'll counterclaim for harassment, trespassing, and abuse of process. Patricia's letter went out the next day. Response to unlawful demand. No easement exists. Dear Mr. Whitmore. This firm represents Alex Bennett, owner of the property adjacent to Meadowbrook Estates. Your letter of April 12th is without merit, and your legal claims are baseless. There is no prescriptive easement. Your clients have used the roadway for 15 years, not 20. Moreover, prior use was permissive, granted informally by the previous owner. Permissive use does not establish a prescriptive easement under North Carolina law. There is no implied easement by necessity. Mr. Bennett's property was never subdivided from Meadowbrook Estates or the adjacent expansion site. The parcels have separate ownership histories. Your client's development plans do not create a legal obligation for Mr. Bennett to provide access. Public interest is irrelevant. Private property rights are not subordinate to speculative development projects. Mr. Bennett's roadway is private. The gate is legal. Your clients are trespassing if they enter without permission. Cease all unauthorized use immediately. Trespassing will result in criminal complaints and civil action. Sincerely, Patricia Gaines. Karen's response wasn't legal. It was personal. 2 days after Patricia's letter was delivered, Ed called me. You need to check the Meadowbrook Facebook group. I didn't have access. But Ed sent me screenshots. Karen had posted an announcement to the private Meadowbrook Estates residents group. Emergency HOA meeting Phase 2, UPDAT. 2 interference from an adjacent landowner. The Phase 2 expansion is at risk. The landowner has blocked access to the roadway that connects our community to the expansion site, costing us millions in potential property value and jeopardizing the future of Meadowbrook. Emergency meeting this Thursday, 7 p.m., Clubhouse. All residents encouraged to attend. We need to discuss our options and make our voices heard. The post had over 100 comments. Most of them angry. Who does this guy think he is? Going to destroy our property values because he's selfish. Can't the county force him to? Open the road? This is ridiculous. I've been using that road for years. A few voices of reason tried to push back. If it's his land, doesn't he have the right to control it? Maybe we should have gotten an easement in writing years ago. But those comments were drowned out. The trespassing started that weekend. I got motion alerts from the trail cameras I'd installed near the gate. The footage showed Meadowbrook residents walking up to the gate, reading the signs, then climbing over or going around it. Some left notes tucked into the chain. You're costing families their dreams. Shame on you. This road belongs to everyone. You can't just lock it. We'll see you in court. One video showed a man in his 40s trying to cut the lock with bolt cutters. Gave up after a few minutes and left. I downloaded all the footage, backed it up, and sent copies to Patricia. They're escalating, Patricia said. File a police report, document everything, and don't engage with them directly. Let me handle it. I filed the report. The sheriff's office sent a deputy to take my statement and review the footage. He issued warnings to 2 Meadowbrook residents whose license plates were visible in the videos. But the trespassing didn't stop, because Karen had rallied her community, and now 300 HOA residents thought I was the villain standing between them and their expansion. They didn't know the full story. They didn't know Karen had gambled their future on access to land she didn't own, and they didn't know that no amount of pressure, threats, or lawsuits was going to change one simple fact. 78 acres were mine, the road was mine, and the gate. It was staying locked. The trespassing escalated over the next 2 weeks. The first lock I'd installed on the gate was cut within 3 days. I replaced it with a heavier-duty padlock and added a second chain. That lock lasted less than a week. Before someone cut through it with an angle grinder, I found metal shavings scattered in the gravel and the lock lying in the ditch. I installed a third lock, this time with a hardened steel shackle and a protective cover. I also added more trail cameras, positioning them to capture not just the gate, but the approaches from multiple angles. The footage told the story. Meadowbrook residents weren't just walking through anymore, they were driving. One video showed an SUV pulling up to the gate, a man getting out with bolt cutters, cutting the chain, then driving through and leaving the gate open behind him. Another showed a pickup truck simply driving around the gate, cutting through the grass and leaving. Deep ruts in the soft ground near the ditch, trash started appearing along the road, fast food bags, coffee cups, beer cans. Someone left a broken lawn chair near the shed. Another person dumped a bag of yard waste, grass clippings, and branches right in the middle of the road. Documented everything. Photos, videos, timestamps, license plates when I could get them. And I filed more police reports. The sheriff's office sent deputies out twice more. They identified and warned for additional Meadowbrook residents for trespassing. One deputy told me privately, "You're within your rights to press charges if you want. This is clearly intentional." I told him I'd consider it. But I wanted to see if the warnings would work first. They didn't, because the trespassing wasn't random. It was organized. Karen was rallying her community, and she wasn't just using the HOA Facebook group anymore. Ed forwarded me a link to a change.org petition that Karen had created. It's demand public access to county roads, stop one landowner from blocking community growth. A local landowner has. It's illegally locked a roadway that has been used by our community for over a decade. This roadway is the only practical access to a major residential development that would bring jobs, housing, and economic growth to our county. By blocking access, this landowner is costing our community millions in lost property value, preventing affordable housing from being built, damaging the local economy. We demand that the county enforce public access to this roadway and stop one individual from holding an entire community hostage. The petition had over 400 signatures within 48 hours, mostly Meadowbrook residents, but also people from surrounding areas who didn't know the full story. The comments were brutal. This is exactly what's wrong with America. One selfish person blocking progress for everyone. He doesn't even use that land. Just let people through. The county needs to step in and take the land through eminent domain. I read through the petition and felt my jaw tighten. Karen was lying, calling the road public, claiming the expansion was affordable housing, framing me as a villain blocking economic growth. None of it was true, but it didn't matter. The narrative was taking hold. Karen's next move was to weaponize county agencies. Over the next week, I received visits from code enforcement, and inspectors showed up unannounced, claiming there had been complaints about unpermitted structures. On my property, he walked the land, examined Ray's old shed, checked for zoning violations, and found nothing. The shed predated current zoning codes and was grandfathered. No violations. Case closed. Environmental health, another inspector visited, citing anonymous complaints about possible illegal dumping or septic issues. He inspected the area around the shed, checked for contamination, and found nothing. No violations. County Planning Office. A planner called to ask if I had plans to subdivide or develop the property. I told him no. He noted it and hung up each time. The inspectors were professional and apologetic. One of them even said, "Look, I don't know who's filing these complaints, but there's nothing wrong here. Someone's wasting our time." I knew exactly who was filing the complaints. Karen was trying to find anything in any violation, any leverage she could use to force me into compliance. She found nothing. Then Karen took the campaign public. She started posting in local Facebook groups, beyond Meadowbrook community pages for the county, town, and neighboring developments. The posts were carefully crafted to make me look like the villain. Post number 1, May 3rd. There's a landowner in our area who owns 78 acres of undeveloped land and has locked the only road that connects to a planned affordable housing development. Families are waiting for homes, and one person is blocking progress because he doesn't want people on his road. This is what happens when property rights are used to hurt communities. The post included an aerial photo of my property clearly, taken from Google Maps with a red circle around the gravel road and an arrow pointing to the locked gate. Comments poured in. 78 acres, and he won't let people use a road? That's greed. Why does he even need that much land? The county should force him to open it. A few people pushed back. If it's his land, doesn't he have the right to control it? Maybe the developer should have secured an easement before planning the project. But those comments were buried. Post number 2, May 6th update. The landowner is now pressing charges against residents who've been using the road for years. He's trying to criminalize families just for taking a shortcut. This is about power and control, not property rights. That post got even more traction. Local news outlets started picking it up. One reporter reached out to me for comment. I declined and referred them to Patricia. Patricia was livid when she saw the posts. This is defamation. She said, she's lying, manipulating public opinion, and inciting harassment. We need to file. Patricia prepared a civil complaint and filed it in county court. Claims: injunction to stop harassment, seeking a court order barring Karen and Meadowbrook residents from trespassing, damaging property, or posting defamatory content. Restraining. Order against Karen personally, barring her from entering my property, contacting me directly. Or organizing further harassment. Damages seeking compensation for destroyed locks, damaged roads, legal fees, and time spent dealing with false complaints. The complaint included all the evidence: videos of trespassing, photos of cut locks, screenshots of Karen's posts, records of the code enforcement complaints, and the petition. Patricia's cover letter was blunt. Defendant Karen Westfield has orchestrated a sustained campaign of harassment, trespassing, and defamation, designed to coerce plaintiff into surrendering his legal rights. This conduct is unlawful, and it must stop. 2 days after we filed, I received a call from Karen's attorney, Marcus Whitmore. Mr. Bennett, I think we got off on the wrong foot, Whitmore said, his tone conciliatory. My client is willing to negotiate. What would it take for you to grant an easement? The HOA is willing to pay fair market value. I'm not interested, I said. We could structure it with conditions, limited use, maintenance agreements, liability protections. You'd retain ownership and the HOA would compensate you for access. The property isn't for sale. The road isn't for rent. And I'm not interested in enabling an expansion that benefits Karen's property values at my expense. The answer is no. Whitmore was silent for a moment. You realize this is going to court? I know, and I'll win. You're making this harder than it needs to be, Whitmore said. No, I said. Karen made this hard when she assumed she could take what wasn't hers. I'm just defending my property. I hung up. The final straw came on a Tuesday morning in mid-May. I was driving to the property when I saw a cluster of vehicles parked near the gate. Karen's Lexus, a black sedan with county government plates, and a white van with a local news station logo on the side. I pulled over and got out. Karen was standing in front of the gate. The man in his 60s wearing a suit, County Commissioner Dale Hutchins, and a reporter holding a microphone. Cameraman was filming. Karen was mid-speech, gesturing toward the gate, her voice loud and practiced, blocking affordable housing development in this county. Families are waiting for homes, and one landowner is standing in the way because he refuses to allow access to a road that's been used by the community for years. This is about greed, pure and simple. The reporter turned to Commissioner Hutchins. Commissioner, can the county intervene? Hutchins shifted uncomfortably. Well, private property rights are protected, but we're always looking for ways to facilitate responsible development. I walked up to the group. Excuse me. Karen turned, her expression flickering between surprise and irritation. Mr. Bennett. We were just discussing the situation. You mean the situation where you're lying to the press? Said the cameraman, swung the camera toward me. The reporter stepped forward. Sir, are you the property owner? I am. Can you explain why you've locked the gate? Because it's my property, I said. That road is private. It's always been private. I have every right to control who uses it. Karen jumped in. You're blocking a major affordable housing development? That's a lie, I said. looking directly at the camera. The development Karen's talking about is 50 luxury homes starting at $450,000. That's not affordable housing. And it's not my responsibility to provide access to a project that benefits her HOA and a private developer. The reporter looked at Karen. Is that true? Are these luxury homes? Karen's face flushed. The development will increase housing supply, which helps affordability. That's not what affordable housing means, I said. And this road, it's been used informally by a few people because my uncle allowed it. That doesn't create a legal right. Karen's trying to manipulate public opinion because she planned an expansion without securing access first. That's her mistake, not mine. Commissioner Hutchins cleared his throat. Mr. Bennett, is there any scenario where you'd consider granting an easement? No, I said. The land is mine. The road is mine. And I'm not giving access to a project I never agreed to support. Karen stepped forward, her voice rising. You're destroying property values for 300 families. Then maybe you shouldn't have promised them an expansion you couldn't deliver, I said. The cameraman kept filming. Reporter took notes. Karen stood there, speechless. Her carefully staged publicity stunt falling apart in real time, because the truth was simple. I'd just said it on camera. The land was mine. The road was mine. And no amount of manipulation, lies, or political pressure was going to change that. Karen had thought she could force me to open the gate, by turning public opinion against me. But all she'd done was expose her own deception, and now was on the news. The lawsuit was filed on May 9th. 22nd to 20-page complaint with exhibits. Filed in County Superior Court by Whitmore and Associates on behalf of Karen Westfield personally, and the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association. The caption read, Meadowbrook Estates HOA in Karen Westfield plaintiffs. Alex Bennett. Defendant, the complaint sought three things. 1. Easement by necessity. Complaint alleged that the Phase 2 expansion site was effectively landlocked without access through my property, and that an easement by necessity should be granted to allow Meadowbrook and the developer to proceed with the project. 2. Injunction. The complaint demanded that the court order me to remove the gate, restore access to the gravel road, refrain from interfering with Meadowbrook residents' use of the road. 3. Damages. The complaint claimed that my unlawful obstruction had cost the HOA and its members over $500,000 in lost development fees, delayed property value increases, and wasted planning expenses. The final paragraph was dramatic. Defendant has used his property as a weapon to harm an entire community. His refusal to allow reasonable access is arbitrary, retaliatory, and contrary to the public good. The court should grant relief to prevent one individual from holding hundreds of families hostage. I read the complaint twice, then forwarded it to Patricia. Her response came within an hour. They're desperate, and desperate people make mistakes. Let's respond. Tricia filed our answer and counterclaim 2 weeks later. The counterclaim was methodical and aggressive. Claims 1. Trespassing multiple incidents. We documented dozens of incidents where Meadowbrook residents had entered my property without permission, cut locks, driven through, and left trash. Each incident was supported by trail camera footage, photos, and Timest. 2. Harassment and defamation. We presented Karen's social media posts, the Change.org petition, and the coordinated campaign to pressure me into surrendering my rights. We argued that Karen had knowingly made false statements, calling the road public, the expansion affordable housing, and me a land hoarder, to incite harassment. 3. Attempted extortion. We argued that Karen and the HOA had used public pressure, threats of legal action, and organized trespassing to coerce me into granting an easement. I had no legal obligation to provide. 4. Damages. We sought compensation for destroyed locks and property damage. $2, 500 time and resources spent responding to false code enforcement complaints. $1, 200 legal fees and costs. $25,000 in growing emotional distress and loss of peaceful enjoyment of property. Patricia's cover letter was blunt. Plaintiffs planned a multi-million-dollar development on the assumption they could force access through defendant's private property. When defendant refused, plaintiffs launched a campaign of harassment, defamation, and trespassing designed to coerce compliance. This lawsuit is the final act of that campaign. It should be dismissed, and defendant is entitled to relief. The case entered the discovery phase, and that's when things got interesting. Patricia issued subpoenas for all emails and documents related to the Phase 2 expansion internal HOA communications about my property and the access road, Karen's personal communications with Crestwood Properties, the developer, financial records showing Karen's property value, and potential gains from the expansion. The documents we received were damaging. Email number 1, March 15th, 2023. 2 years before I inherited the land from Karen Westfield 2, Brian Holder. Crestwood Properties, Brian. I've reviewed the site plan for Phase 2. Access is going to be an issue. The current owner, Ray Bennett, has been allowing informal use of his access road, but there's nothing in writing. If he sells or passes, we may have a problem. Can we explore options for acquiring his land or securing a formal easement? Reply from Brian Holder. Karen, we looked into it. Ray Bennett has refused to sell every time we've approached him. In his 80s, so it's a waiting game. Once the land transfers to an heir or estate sale, we'll make an offer. In the meantime, keep encouraging residents to use the road. The more established the use, the stronger our case for a prescriptive easement, if it comes to that. Email number 2, April 8th, 2024 weeks, after I inherited from Karen Westfield 2, Meadowbrook HOA Board. Bad news. Ray Bennett passed, and the land went to his nephew, not an estate sale. The nephew, Alex Bennett, has already posted the property and locked the gate. He's not responding to outreach. We need to establish that the road is essential to community use. Encourage residents to keep using it, document the use, and we'll build a case for access rights. Internal HOA, document property value analyses, spreadsheet titled Phase 2 Impact on Property Values. Showed projected increases for homes in Meadowbrook if the expansion proceeded. Karen's address was highlighted, her home located on the eastern edge of Meadowbrook, directly bordering the proposed Phase 2 site, was projected to increase in value by $85,000 if the expansion was completed. Karen had a direct financial interest in the expansion succeeding. Text messages Karen to multiple residents, May 2024, keep using the road. Don't let him intimidate you. The more we use it, the stronger our legal case. If the gate's locked, go around it. He can't stop all of us. Document your use. Take photos. Act. We need to show continuous access for the lawsuit. Karen had instructed residents to trespass deliberately to build a legal case for prescriptive. Use. Patricia scheduled Karen's deposition for July 10th. I attended. Sitting quietly in the conference room while Patricia asked questions. Karen sat across the table with Marcus Whitmore, her attorney, who looked increasingly uncomfortable as the deposition progressed. Patricia started with the basics, moved in for the critical admissions. Patricia. Ms. Westfield. Before Mr. Bennett locked the gate, did you ever ask him for permission to use the road for the Phase 2 expansion? Karen. I tried to talk to him, but he was unreasonable. Patricia. That's not what I asked. Did you ever formally request permission? Karen. No, but Patricia. So you planned a $20 million expansion that depended on access through his property, and you never asked his permission? We assumed he'd cooperate? His uncle always allowed access. Patricia. His uncle allowed occasional use by a few residents? Did Ray Bennett ever give written permission for commercial development access? Karen. No, but it was understood. Patricia. Understood by whom? Karen. By the community. Patricia. But not by the property owner. Karen hesitated. No. Patricia. You own a home on the eastern edge of Meadowbrook, correct? Karen. Yes. Patricia. And that home borders the proposed Phase 2 expansion site? Karen. Yes. Patricia. How much would your property value increase if the expansion is completed? Whitmore. Objection. Relevance. Patricia. It goes to bias and financial interest, Your Honor. The court reporter noted the objection. Patricia continued. Patricia. According to HOA documents, your home is projected to increase in value by $85,000. If Phase 2 proceeds, is that correct? Karen. I don't know the exact number, Patricia. You prepared the analysis. It's Exhibit 14. Your address is highlighted. Karen glanced at Whitmore, then back at Patricia. I may have prepared it, but that doesn't mean, Patricia, you have a direct financial interest in the expansion succeeding. Correct, Karen, I suppose, but so does everyone in Meadowbrook, Patricia. Not $85,000 worth, just you. Patricia. In May 2024, you sent text messages to multiple Meadowbrook residents instructing them to keep using the road and go around the gate even after Mr. Bennett locked it. Why, Karen? I was trying to maintain community access, Patricia. You were trying to establish a prescriptive easement through continued trespassing, weren't you, Karen? No, Patricia. You wrote, and I quote, "The more we use it, the stronger." Our legal case? What legal case were you referring to?
Ow.
Karen didn't answer immediately. Whitmore leaned over and whispered something to her. Karen. I was referring to the possibility that continued use would show the road was essential. Patricia. By essential, you mean you were trying to manufacture evidence of a prescriptive easement by encouraging trespassing? Whitmore. Objection, Patricia. Withdrawn. No further questions. By the time the deposition ended, Patricia had locked in several key admissions. Karen never asked my permission before planning the expansion. Karen assumed informal use created a permanent right. Karen had a significant financial interest in the expansion. Succeeding, Karen encouraged residents to trespass to build a legal case. Patricia walked out of the deposition with a satisfied smile. She just tanked her own case. The judge scheduled a hearing on motions for summary judgment for August 15th. Karen was confident. I could tell from the way she carried herself in the courthouse hallway before the hearing, chin-up tailored suit. Flanked by Meadowbrook residents who'd come to support her, she thought she was going to win, but Patricia had one more piece of evidence Karen didn't know about. A week before the hearing, I'd reviewed all the trail camera footage again, ours, and hours of clips going back to April. And I found it. A video from May 9th, timestamped 6:22 a.m., Karen Westfield. Alone, walking up to the gate with a pair of bolt cutters, cutting the lock, opening the gate, driving through, and leaving it open behind her. Patricia entered the video to evidence as Exhibit 7. And when the hearing started, Karen had no idea what was coming because the video didn't just show trespassing. It showed Karen HOA, president, plaintiff, and self-appointed defender of community access, personally destroying my property to force her way through. And once the judge saw it, Karen's credibility was finished. The hearing was held on August 15th at 9 a.m. in the county Superior Court, a larger courtroom than I'd been in before. With high ceilings, wood paneling, and seating for over 100 people, by the time Patricia and I arrived at 8:45, the gallery was already packed. The left side was filled with Meadowbrook residents, sizzly 50 of them, dressed in business casual, some wearing matching Meadowbrook strong t-shirts. Karen sat at the plaintiff's table with Marcus Whitmore, looking confident and composed, occasionally turning to nod at supporters in the gallery. The right side had a few curious locals, a reporter from the county paper, and Ed Paulson, my neighbor, who'd driven down to watch. Judge Thomas Aldridge entered at exactly 9 a.m., a man in his mid-60s with silver hair, sharp eyes, and a reputation for no-nonsense property law rulings. He'd been on the bench for over 20 years, and attorneys in the county knew better than to waste his time with weak arguments. The bailiff called the court to order. Judge Aldridge reviewed the case file briefly, then looked up. This is Meadowbrook Estates HOA and Karen Westfield versus Alex Bennett. We're here on cross motions for summary judgment. Mr. Whitmore, you may begin. Marcus Whitmore stood, buttoning his jacket, and addressed the court with the polished confidence of a seasoned litigator. Your Honor, this case is about a community's right to reasonable access and a landowner's refusal to act in the public interest. My client's the Meadowbrook Estates HOA and its president, Karen Westfield's, an easement by necessity across defendant's property to enable a residential development that will benefit the entire county. Whitmore walked to a display board showing an aerial photo of my property and the proposed Phase 2 expansion site. He pointed to the gravel road. This roadway has been used openly by Meadowbrook residents for over 15 years. It is the only practical access to the Phase R site. Alternative routes would require expensive construction through protected wetlands, costing over $2 million and causing significant environmental harm. The defendant has locked this road not because he uses it, but because he wants to exert control over a development he personally opposes. Whitmore gestured toward me. Mr. Bennett doesn't even use this road. He's being unreasonable, obstructive, and selfish. The expansion would bring jobs, housing, and tax revenue to this county. Blocking it serves no legitimate purpose. It only satisfies one man's desire for control. Whitmore turned back to the judge. We ask the court to grant an easement by necessity, order the gate removed, and award damages for the harm Mr. Bennett's obstruction has caused to this community. He sat down. Several Meadowbrook residents in the gallery nodded approvingly. Judge Aldridge made a note. Ms. Gaines Patricia stood, composed and methodical, carrying a binder and a remote control for the courtroom's projection system. Your Honor, this case is not about reasonable access or the public good. It's about a failed real estate scheme and an HOA president who assumed she could force access to land she doesn't own. The evidence will show that plaintiffs never secured permission, never negotiated in good faith, and resorted to harassment and litigation when the property owner refused to cooperate. Patricia opened her binder. Let's address the legal claims first. No easement exists. Patricia projected the first exhibit onto the screen, the deed to my property, showing clear boundaries and ownership. This property has been in the Bennett family since 1982. It was never part of Meadowbrook Estates. It was never subdivided from Meadowbrook. It predates the HOA by over 25 years. She clicked to the next slide. A title search report. There are 0 recorded easements on this property. No agreements, no licenses. No recorded rights of any kind granting Meadowbrook access. She clicked again. Photos of the gravel road with timestamps. The prior owner, Ray Bennett, occasionally allowed a few Meadowbrook residents to use the road as a courtesy. Permissively and formally revocable at any time. Permissive use does not create a prescriptive easement, no matter how long it continues. Patricia looked at the judge. Plaintiffs claimed 15 years of use. But North Carolina requires 20 years of continuous, hostile use to establish a prescriptive easement. They're 5 years short. And more importantly, the use was never hostile. It was always permissive. No necessity. Patricia clicked to the next slide. A map showing alternative access routes to the Phase 2 site. Plaintiffs claim easement by necessity. But necessity easements only apply when land is landlocked, when there is no other way to access the property. That's not the case here. She pointed to the map. There are alternative routes. They're expensive, yes. They require permitting and environmental mitigation, but they exist. Inconvenience and cost do not create legal necessity. Patricia paused. More fundamentally, easement by necessity only applies when a single parcel of land is subdivided. One piece becomes landlocked as a result. Mr. Bennett's land was never part of Meadowbrook or the expansion site. There is no common origin, no subdivision, no necessity. Karen orchestrated harassment. Patricia's tone sharpened. When Mr. Bennett refused to grant access, plaintiffs didn't negotiate. They didn't offer fair compensation. They launched a campaign of harassment designed to coerce compliance. She clicked to the next slide. Screenshots of Karen's Facebook posts. Ms. Westfield posted false statements on social media, calling the road public and the expansion affordable housing. She organized a petition. She filed false complaints with code enforcement. Patricia projected the text messages Karen had sent to residents. Keep using the road. Go around the gate. The more we use it, the stronger our legal. Ms. Westfield admitted in her deposition that she encouraged trespassing to manufacture evidence of continuous use. Then Patricia played the video. The courtroom went silent as the footage filled the screen. The timestamp read May 9th, 2024 to 6:22 a.m. Karen Westfield walked up to the locked gate, alone carrying bolt cutters. She positioned the cutters on the lock, squeezed, and cut through the shackle. The lock fell to the ground. Karen opened the gate, drove through in her Lexus, and left the gate open behind her. The video ended. Patricia let the silence hang for a moment, then said, "That's the plaintiff, the HOA president. personally cutting Mr. Bennett's lock and trespassing. On his property, a few murmurs rippled through the gallery. Karen's face had gone pale. Financial conflict of interest. Patricia clicked to the final slide. The HOA property value analysis with Karen's address highlighted. Ms. Westfield's home is projected to increase in value by $85,000. If the Phase 2 expansion proceeds, she has a direct financial interest in forcing this easement. This lawsuit isn't about the community, it's about her property values. Patricia closed her binder. Plaintiffs planned a development without securing access. When the property owner refused to cooperate, they resorted to harassment, defamation, and litigation. They have no legal right to an easement. They have no right to Mr. Bennett's land. And this court should dismiss their claims and grant relief. To the defendant, she sat down. Judge Aldridge leaned forward and looked directly at Karen. Ms. Westfield, I have a question for you. Karen stood, glancing nervously at Whitmore. Yes, Your Honor. Did you ever ask Mr. Bennett for permission to use his road for the Phase 2 expansion? Karen hesitated. I tried to negotiate, but he refused. To be reasonable, that's not what I asked, Judge Aldridge said. Did you ask for permission before planning an expansion that required access through his land? We assumed he'd cooperate. You assumed. Judge Aldridge's tone was sharp. You didn't ask. You didn't negotiate. You didn't offer compensation. You just planned a multi-million-dollar development that required access to land you don't own. And when the owner said no, you tried to force it through harassment and litigation. We have a right to develop. You have a right to develop your land, Ms. Westfield. You don't have a right to someone else's. Karen opened her mouth to respond, but Whitmore put a hand on her arm. She sat down. Judge Aldridge spent less than 5 minutes reviewing his notes. Then he delivered his ruling. This case is straightforward. Plaintiffs seek an easement across defendant's private property to enable a residential development. They claim easement by necessity, prescriptive use, and public interest. None of these claims have merit. He looked at Whitmore. There is no easement by necessity. The expansion site is not landlocked. Okay? Alternative access exists. The fact that it's expensive is irrelevant. There is no prescriptive easement. Plaintiffs have not met the 20-year requirement. And prior use was permissive, not hostile. Public interest does not override private property rights. If the county wants to facilitate this development, it can pursue eminent domain with compensation. But plaintiffs cannot force a private landowner to surrender his rights to enable their project. Judge Aldridge turned to Karen. Ms. Westfield, the evidence shows that you personally cut Mr. Bennett's lock, trespassed on his property, and orchestrated a campaign of harassment to coerce compliance. Your conduct is unacceptable. He delivered the ruling. 1. Plaintiff's claims are dismissed in their entirety. 2. The gate stays locked. No easement is granted. 3. Karen Westfield is personally liable for $12,000 in damages for trespassing. In harassment 4, Meadowbrook Estates HOA is ordered to pay $18,500 in legal fees and costs. 5. Restraining order granted. Karen Westfield and all Meadowbrook residents are permanently barred from entering defendant's property. Judge Aldridge closed the file. Ms. Westfield, you don't get to plan a development on someone else's property and then sue when they won't cooperate. The entitlement here is staggering. The gate stays locked. Learn to respect boundaries. Court is adjourned. The gavel came down. Karen sat frozen at the plaintiff's table, her face pale, her hands clenched. Whitmore gathered his papers quickly. Avoiding eye contact with the Meadowbrook residents in the gallery, Karen stood, grabbed her purse, and walked out of the courtroom without looking at anyone. Several Meadowbrook residents followed her, but their expressions had shifted from confidence to confusion to anger. Ed leaned over to me as we stood. She just lost everything. Patricia smiled. She did. By the time I reached the courthouse steps, Karen was already gone. But the consequences were just beginning, because the ruling didn't just block the easement. It killed the expansion, and with the expansion dead, Karen's reign as HOA president was over, because when you gamble an entire community's future on land you don't own, and you lose, there's no coming back from that. The gate stayed locked, and Karen Westfield. She was finished. The local newspaper ran the story the next day, front page. Judge dismisses HOA lawsuit. Blocks Meadowbrook expansion. The article was detailed and damning. Quoted Judge Aldridge's ruling, described the video of Karen cutting the lock, and included the $12,000 judgment against her personally. It also mentioned her $85,000 financial interest in the expansion, a detail that hadn't been widely known before. The online version was shared hundreds of times within hours. The comment section lit up, so she was trying to force an easement to boost her own property value? That's fraud. She lied about affordable housing and the road being public. How is she still HOA president? The video of her cutting the lock says everything. She's a hypocrite. Good for the landowner. He stood his ground. A few commenters still defended Karen, but they were drowned out. Public opinion had shifted sharply, not because people suddenly loved property rights, but because Karen had been exposed as dishonest, self-interested, and manipulative. She'd gambled an entire community's future on land she didn't own, lied to residents about the facts, and personally broken the law to force compliance, and she'd lost. The Meadowbrook Estates Facebook group exploded. Ed forwarded me screenshots throughout the day. The tone had gone from supportive to furious. Post number 1, August 16th, 9:14 a.m. I just read the full court ruling. Karen KNEW, the landowner, refused access before she announced Phase 2 to the community. She KNEW, there was no easement. And she told us it was a done deal anyway. We've been lied to, replies poured in. She also stands to gain $85,000 if the expansion happens. She had a personal financial interest and never disclosed it. The video of her cutting the lock is online. She broke the law while suing someone else for protecting their property. I donated to the legal fund, thinking we were fighting for community access. Now I find out it was all to boost Karen's property value? Post number 2, August 16th, 2:47 p.m. Emergency HOA meeting called for Thursday night. Motion to remove Karen as president will be on the agenda. Everyone needs to show up. The emergency meeting was held on Thursday. It's August 18th at 7 p.m. in the Meadowbrook Clubhouse. Ed didn't attend, but he heard from a friend who did. Over 200 residents showed up, the largest turnout in the HOA's history. Karen sat at the board table, flanked by 2 loyal board members, looking defiant. The new acting treasurer opened the meeting by reading the financial damage. $18,500 in legal fees paid to me, $12,000 in personal damages owed by Karen, which she'd tried to get the HOA to cover, and an estimated $50,000 in wasted planning and consulting fees for Phase 2. Total loss, over $80,000. The room erupted in angry murmurs. One homeowner stood and addressed Karen directly. You told us Phase 2 was approved. You told us the access road was secured. You told us Bennett was the problem. But the court ruling says you never secured access. You planned this expansion without permission. You lied to us. Karen tried to respond. I was acting in the community's best interest. You were acting in your interest. Another resident interrupted. Your house would have gained $85,000. You never disclosed that. A third resident stood, holding a printed copy of the court ruling. The judge said you personally cut Bennett's lock and trespassed. You broke the law while suing him for protecting his property. How are you still president? Karen's voice rose. I did what I had to do to fight for this community. You cost us $80,000 and killed the expansion.
Okay.
Someone shouted from the back. The acting treasurer called for order, then read the motion. Motion to remove Karen Westfield as HOA president, effective immediately. A second followed. The vote was called 187 in favor. 34 opposed. Karen was removed. She stood, grabbed her belongings, and walked out of the meeting without another word. A handful of her supporters followed, but the rest of the room stayed silent. Watching her leave, the new interim HOA president was a man named David Chunna, retired engineer who'd been on the board for 2 years and had quietly opposed Karen's aggressive tactics. He was elected unanimously at the same meeting. 3 days later, I received an email from him. Subject: Apology from Meadowbrook Estates, HOA. Bennett, my name is David Chen, and I've been elected interim president of the Meadowbrook Estates HOA. Following the recent removal of our previous leadership, on behalf of the board and our community, I want to formally apologize for the actions taken by Ms. Westfield and others. The trespassing, the harassment, and the lawsuit were wrong. You were defending your legal rights, and we should have respected that from the beginning. We acknowledge that your property is private, you owe us no access, and that the Phase 2 expansion was planned irresponsibly without securing permission. First, moving forward, the HOA will respect your boundaries. We have issued a community-wide notice reminding residents that your land is private, that trespassing will not be tolerated. We hope to move forward as respectful neighbors. Sincerely, David Chen, Interim President, Meadowbrook Estates HOA. I replied, Mr. Chen, thank you for the apology. I appreciate the acknowledgement and the change in tone. I'm not interested in conflict with your community. I simply want my property rights respected. If Meadowbrook residents stay off my land and respect the boundaries, we won't have any issues. Alex. Bennett, the developer, pulls out on August 25th. Crestwood Properties issued a public statement. After careful review, Crestwood Properties has decided not to proceed with the Meadowbrook Estates Phase 2 expansion. Access and permitting issues, combined with recent community conflict, make the project financially unfeasible at this time. We thank Meadowbrook residents for their interest and support. The expansion was dead, without access through my land. Crestwood couldn't justify the cost of building a new road through the wetlands. The project wasn't viable. They walked away. For Karen, the consequences were immediate and personal. Her home, which she'd purchased specifically because it bordered the future Phase 2 site, lost the premium value it would have gained from the expansion. Instead of increasing by $85,000, her property value stagnated. Some estimates suggested it might even drop slightly due to the negative publicity surrounding the lawsuit. Karen had bet everything on Phase 2, and she'd lost. Karen's last attempts, Karen, didn't go quietly. In early September, she filed an ethics complaint against Patricia with the North Carolina State Bar, alleging unethical conduct and misrepresentation of facts. The complaint was reviewed and dismissed within 2 weeks. The State Bar found no basis for the allegations. Karen also threatened to sue several Meadowbrook residents who'd voted to remove her, claiming defamation and breach of fiduciary duty. She never followed through. She had no case and no money left to pursue it. Respectful requests. Not all Meadowbrook residents had supported Karen's tactics. A few had stayed quiet during the conflict, respecting my property rights, even when it was unpopular. In late September, I received an email from a Meadowbrook resident named Tom Hargrove. Mr. Bennett, my name is Tom Hargrove, and I live in Meadowbrook. With my wife and 2 kids, I want to start by apologizing for the way you were treated. I didn't participate in the trespassing or the harassment, but I also didn't speak up when I should have. That was wrong. I'm writing to ask if you'd consider granting my family occasional access to your land for deer hunting during the season. I'd be happy to follow any rules you set, provide advance notice, and document the access formally. If you're not comfortable with it, completely understand. Thank you for your time. Tom's request was respectful, specific, and acknowledged what had happened. I granted him a limited, revocable hunting license, documented, recorded with the county, and conditional on following the rules. 2 other families made similar requests over the following weeks, one for hiking, one for bird watching. I granted. Both, they were the kinds of neighbors Uncle Ray would have allowed access to. Respectful, humble, willing to ask rather than assume. Karen's exit 6 months later in February, Ed called me. You're not going to believe this, he said. Karen's result. House just went up for sale. Pulled up the real estate listing online. The photos showed Karen's home immaculate, professionally staged. With a price tag of $485,000, the listing had been active for 3 days. Ed sent me a follow-up text a week later. Accepted offer. She's leaving. Karen Westfield was done with. Meadowbrook. The lawsuit had cost her $12,000 in damages. The failed expansion had cost her tens of thousands in lost property value. The removal from her HOA presidency had stripped her of the power, an influence she'd wielded for years, and the public humiliation, the video of her cutting the lock, the exposure of her financial conflict of interest, the unanimous vote removing her had made staying in Meadowbrook impossible. She sold her house, packed up, and left. I never saw her again. I stood at the locked gate one evening in early spring, looking out over the 78 acres that had caused so much conflict. The land was quiet now. The trespassing had stopped. The harassment had ended. Meadowbrook had new leadership that respected boundaries. Karen had thought she could control land she didn't own. She'd thought entitlement, pressure, litigation would force me to give up my rights. She was wrong, and she'd paid the price, not just in money, but in reputation, power, and the community she'd tried to rule. Because in the end, you can't force access to land that isn't yours. You can't plan a development without securing permission, and you can't sue someone for defending their property when you're the one who broke the law. Karen learned all of that the hard way, and now she was gone, leaving behind a locked gate, a failed expansion, and a lesson Meadowbrook would never forget. Respect the boundary, or lose everything trying to cross it. I stood at the gate on a warm afternoon in late April, nearly a year after I'd first locked it. The gravel road stretched out behind me, curving through the trees toward the old shed and the open fields beyond. 78 acres of mixed forest, meadow, and quiet land that had been in my family for over 40 years. The gate was still locked, the chain was still secure, and the private property signs were still posted along the boundary, faded slightly. By weather, but still clear, the land was mine. It had always been mine, and it was staying that way. I thought about Karen Westfield about the first time she'd approached me, confident and entitled, holding that glossy HOA brochure and telling me I needed to respect community standards on land I owned outright. She'd called me selfish, said I was blocking progress, said I was hurting families, but this land was never hers. The road was never hers, and the expansion she'd planned without asking, without permission, without securing access was never going to happen. Karen had spent 2 years building a vision of Meadowbrook Phase 2, 50 new luxury homes, upgraded amenities, higher property values, and a larger, more prestigious community. She'd sold that vision to 300 families. She'd worked with developers. She'd held planning meetings. She'd made promises. And she'd based all of it on one assumption, that she could force access to land she didn't own. She thought being HOA president gave her power over property outside her jurisdiction. She thought entitlement, social pressure, and litigation would intimidate me into giving up my rights. She was wrong. I looked at the gate, the steel bars reflecting the afternoon sun, the lock solid and untouched. This gate wasn't here to block progress. It was here to block entitlement. Karen had thought she could walk onto my land, ignore my boundaries, and take what she wanted because it was convenient for her plans. She'd thought community good and property values justified ignoring the law. But property law doesn't care about convenience, doesn't care about HOA visions or expansion plans or what 300 residents think should happen. It cares about the deed, and I had the deed. Karen lost everything because she refused to accept a simple truth. You can't control land you don't own. She couldn't force access to a road. That was mine. She couldn't manufacture an easement by encouraging residents to trespass. She couldn't sue me into surrendering my rights just because it was inconvenient for her. And when she tried, the consequences were swift and total. She lost the lawsuit. The judge dismissed her claims, called her conduct staggering, and ordered her to pay $12,000 in damages. She lost the expansion. The developer pulled out. Phase 2 was dead. She lost her position. Meadowbrook residents voted 187 to 34 to remove her as HOA president. She lost her reputation. The video of her cutting my lock went public. Her financial conflict of interest was exposed. Her lies about affordable housing and public access were revealed, and she lost her home. 6 months later, she sold her house and left Meadowbrook, humiliated and defeated, all because she thought she could take what wasn't hers. I walked along the boundary, checking the fence line, the survey stakes, the signs. Everything was intact.
Nice.
The land was protected. The boundary was clear, a few respectful meadowbrook. Residents had approached me over the past year, families who'd asked politely, acknowledged my rights, and requested limited access for hunting or hiking. I'd granted licenses to 3 of them. They followed the rules. They respected the land. They understood that access was a privilege, not a right. Those were the kinds of neighbors Uncle Ray would have worked with. The kinds of people who understood boundaries and asked rather than assumed. Karen wasn't one of them. She'd assumed. She'd threatened, and she'd paid the price. The sun was setting now, casting long shadows across the gravel road. I stood at the gate, one hand resting on the cold steel. Looking out over the 78 acres that had caused so much conflict, Karen had called this land wasted space. She'd said it should be used for the greater good. She'd posted Ariel photos on social media with captions like, "All this land and one person won't share." But sharing wasn't the issue. Permission was. Karen never asked. She never negotiated. She never offered fair compensation or respected my right to say no. She just planned her expansion, assumed I'd cooperate, and tried to force compliance when I refused. And when that failed, she sued. She lost. Because in the end, property law is simple. It doesn't matter how many people want access to your land. It doesn't matter how powerful you think you are. It doesn't matter if you're an HOA president, a developer, or a county commissioner. If you don't own the land, you don't control the land, and no amount of entitlement, pressure, or litigation changes that. I locked the gate one more time, tested the chain, and walked back to my truck. The 78 acres were mine. They'd been in my family for over 40 years. They were staying in my family. The gate stayed locked. The road stayed private, and Karen, she was gone. Because she'd learned to late that HOA. Authority ends at HOA boundaries, that you can't force access to property you don't own. And that when you gamble an entire community's future on land you have no right to, you lose more than just the lawsuit. You lose everything Karen thought she could control. 78 acres outside her HOA. She couldn't. And the locked gate, the one she'd cut, the one she'd cursed, the one she'd sued over, was still standing, not as a symbol of obstruction, but as a reminder. Respect the boundary. Respect the deed. Respect the law. Because property rights don't care how powerful you think you are. They only care about one thing: who owns the land. And I owned the land. The gate stayed locked. The 78 acres stayed mine. And Karen Westfield was gone forever. Because in the end, the deed was the only thing that mattered. And I had the deed.